For most of her life, Martina Navratilova was the woman nobody wanted to face across a tennis net. She came forward like a storm. She served with purpose, moved like she had already seen the next shot before it happened, and made the grass at Wimbledon look almost like her own backyard. To millions of people who watched tennis through the 1970s, 80s and beyond, Martina did not seem fragile. She seemed built out of nerve, discipline, and willpower. That is why what happened to her later in life feels so difficult to look at. At 69, Martina is no longer just the champion with 18 Grand Slam singles titles, the Wimbledon legend, or the woman who helped change the shape of women's tennis. She is also a survivor, a woman who has sat in doctors' offices waiting for answers, a woman who has heard the word cancer more than once, a woman who once controlled the fastest points in tennis, but had to accept that some battles do not care how strong your legs are, how sharp your mind is, or how many trophies are sitting in your past. And the most painful part is that Martina had already spent a lifetime fighting. She fought to leave the country where she was born. She fought to be accepted in a sport that often misunderstood her. She fought to be respected not just as a great female athlete, but as one of the greatest athletes, period. She fought the loneliness that can come with being ahead of your time. She fought public judgment, private fear, and the quiet cost of always looking stronger than people around her expected a woman to be. Then, decades after her greatest victories, came a different kind of fear. It began with something small enough that many people might have ignored it, a swollen lymph node in her neck. Martina was at the WTA Finals in Fort Worth, Texas, in late 2022 when she noticed it. At first, there was no dramatic scene, no stadium silence, no umpire calling time, just a body sending a warning. She did what people are often afraid to do. She had it checked. The tests brought news nobody wants to hear: throat cancer. Then, while doctors were examining her, they found something else: breast cancer. 2 diagnoses, 2 separate blows. Martina later described it in plain words, the way athletes often do when they are trying not to sound afraid. She called it a double whammy. Serious but still fixable. She said it was going to stink for a while, but she would fight with everything she had. That sounded like Martina. But even courage has private rooms. The public heard the statement. They saw the headlines, they remembered the champion. But they did not have to wake up inside her body during treatment. They did not have to wonder what the next scan would show. They did not have to think about Christmas and ask whether they would still be there to see it. For a woman who had lived so much of her life in motion, illness forced stillness on her. The same Martina who once rushed the net with perfect timing now had to wait. Wait for appointments, wait for results, wait for her strength to come back, wait for the simple things that healthy people forget to be grateful for. And yet, this story is not only about cancer. That would be too small for Martina Navratilova. To understand why so many people felt shaken when they saw her vulnerable, we have to go back much further. Before the commentary booths, before the documentaries, before the grey hair, the hospital fears, and the emotional reunion with Chris Evert, before America knew her name, we have to go back to a young girl in Czechoslovakia who loved tennis enough to risk almost everything for it. Because Martina did not become strong at Wimbledon, she brought that strength with her. Before Martina Navratilova became a champion in America, she was a young girl growing up behind the Iron Curtain. She was born Martina Shubertova on October 18, 1956, in Prague, Czechoslovakia, at a time when the world was divided into 2 hard sides. For many American viewers today, that phrase, the Iron Curtain, brings back a very specific kind of fear. It was not just a political term. It meant borders that did not open easily, governments that watched people closely, and dreams that often had to ask permission before they could breathe. Martina's childhood was not built around luxury. Her parents divorced when she was still very young, and her mother, Jana, later married Miroslav Navratil, the man who became Martina's first real tennis coach. Martina took his surname, and with it came the name the world would one day know. She began hitting tennis balls when she was only a child, and by 7, she was already playing regularly. By 15, she had won the Czechoslovak National Tennis Championship. That was not normal talent. That was the kind of talent people notice before the person carrying it fully understands what it will cost. But growing up gifted in a communist country carried a different kind of pressure. Every tournament outside Czechoslovakia was not just a sporting opportunity. It was a privilege. Travel could be limited. Officials could decide where you went, how long you stayed, and whether you were becoming too influenced by the West. Martina was young, ambitious, and increasingly drawn to the freedom she saw when she traveled. She liked American music, American openness, and the feeling that a person could become more than what the state allowed. That made people nervous back home. By 1975, Martina was only 18 years old, but she already understood something many people do not face until much later in life. To become the player she believed she could be, she might have to lose the life she had known. That year, she played the US Open at Forest Hills in New York. It should have been remembered simply as a tennis tournament. Instead, it became one of the most important turning points of her life. After losing to Chris Evert in the semifinals, Martina went to American immigration authorities and asked to defect from Czechoslovakia. Contemporary accounts place the moment during the 1975 US Open when she was still a teenager, facing a choice most people can barely imagine. The next day, she sat in front of reporters. Cameras clicked, questions flew. The press room was crowded and loud. And there was Martina, only 18, trying to explain a decision that would change everything. She was calm on the outside, but there is no way a decision like that does not shake a person somewhere deep inside. She was not just changing countries, she was cutting herself off from home. Her family was still there. Her childhood was still there. The streets she knew, the language she had heard since birth, the people who had watched her grow up, all of that was suddenly behind her. She had no guarantee of when she would see everyone again. The United States gave her a chance, but it could not give back the feeling of walking through the front door of the house she had left. That is the part many sports stories skip. They say she defected, became free, became great, and won everything. All of that is true. But freedom did not arrive wrapped in comfort. It came with loneliness. It came with fear. It came with reporters who wanted answers, officials back home who saw her choice as betrayal, and a young woman trying to build a future in a country that admired her talent before it fully understood her. Within a few years, she became a US citizen, but citizenship papers do not erase homesickness. They do not quiet the memory of your mother's voice. They do not make an 18-year-old suddenly feel grown. Still, Martina kept playing. That was the one place where life made sense. On the court, the lines were clear. The rules were known. The ball either landed in or out. There was work, there was discipline, and there was always another point. For Martina, tennis became more than ambition. It became survival, and once she had chosen freedom, there was no gentle path ahead. America gave her opportunity, but it also gave her pressure, criticism, and a stage much larger than anything she had known. The girl who had left everything behind would soon become one of the most dominant athletes in the world. But first, she had to learn how to live with the cost of her own courage. When Martina Navratilova first looked across the net at Chris Evert, she was not looking at a future sister. She was looking at the woman standing in her way. Chris was everything American tennis already understood. Calm, polished, controlled. She had the kind of face television loved, and the kind of game that made opponents slowly lose hope. She did not rush. She did not panic. She could stand on the baseline and hit the same clean, punishing ball again and again until the other player finally broke first. Martina was different. She came at the net. She attacked. She sweated openly. She played with muscle and instinct and a hunger that was harder for some people to accept. Chris looked like tradition. Martina looked like the future arriving before the room was ready for it. Together they changed women's tennis. Their rivalry lasted for years and became one of the central stories in sports. They played each other 80 times, with Martina finishing slightly ahead, 43 wins to 37. But numbers alone do not explain what people felt when they watched them. It was the contrast. The left-handed serve and volleyer against the steady baseline master. The defector from Czechoslovakia against America's tennis sweetheart. The emotional outsider against the woman many viewers thought they already knew. Reuters described their story as one that helped define women's tennis for more than 50 years, from teenage competitors to survivors facing illness together decades later. Their first great emotional turning point came at Wimbledon in 1978. Martina was 21 years old. She had already defected. She had already felt the loneliness of building a new life in a new country, but she had not yet won a Grand Slam singles title. Across the net in the Wimbledon final stood Chris Evert, already a champion, already trusted by the public, already the kind of player who knew how to close the door when someone else was trying to step through it. Martina lost the first set. For a player still carrying so much pressure, it could have slipped away quickly. The grass at Wimbledon has a way of exposing nerves. The crowd can feel polite and brutal at the same time, but Martina stayed there. Point by point, she pushed forward, found her nerve, and came back to win in 3 sets. When it was over, she had her first Grand Slam singles title. She also had something even heavier, proof. Proof that leaving home had not been for nothing. Proof that her style could win on the grandest lawn in tennis. Proof that the girl who had once asked America for a chance could now stand at the center of Wimbledon as a champion. That victory also lifted Martina to #1 in the world for the first time. According to the WTA, she first reached the #1 ranking on July 10, 1978, after defeating Evert for that first major title at Wimbledon. Her career would eventually grow into numbers almost too large to sound real. 167 singles titles, 177 doubles titles, 332 weeks ranked #1, and records that still stand across men's and women's tennis. But dominance did not make life simple. The more Martina won, the more people studied her, her body, her voice, her personality, her private life. There were years when she seemed to be judged not only for whether she won, but for the way she existed. She was strong in an era that did not always know what to do with strong women. She was direct when people preferred women to be softer. She was different, and the public often makes different people pay a tax just for being visible. Chris understood part of that pressure, though from another side. She had her own image to carry. The Ice Maiden, the perfect American champion, the woman expected to remain composed no matter what was happening inside. In different ways, both women were trapped by the pictures people had made of them. That is why their relationship became so powerful over time. They were rivals, yes, there were cold stretches, there were matches that hurt. There were days when friendship had to step aside because winning mattered too much. But with age, the old scoreboard lost some of its sharpness. The memories stayed, but the bitterness faded. What remained was respect, and then something warmer than respect. Friendship, real friendship, the kind that survives because both people know too much about each other to pretend. In 2026, that bond returned to public attention through the Netflix documentary Chris and Martina, The Final Set. Netflix described the film as the story of their decades-long dominance of women's tennis and a friendship even cancer could not upset. The Guardian noted that the documentary follows their relationship from fierce competition to deep friendship, while also showing how each woman supported the other through cancer. That is what makes their story so moving now. The same 2 women who once stood on opposite sides of the net, trying to break each other's hearts in front of thousands of people, eventually found themselves on the same side of something much more frightening. Doctor visits, treatment, fear, waiting. The old rivalry did not disappear. It simply became part of a larger story. They had pushed each other when they were young. Now they held each other up when life became fragile. And for Martina, that friendship matters because it proves something her career alone never could. She did not only win, she lasted. Martina Navratilova had spent her life trusting her body. That body had carried her through long rallies in summer heat, across the grass at Wimbledon, through doubles matches that stretched late into the day, and through decades of training most people would never have survived. She knew what tired felt like. She knew what pain felt like. She knew the difference between soreness and danger. So when she noticed a swollen lymph node in her neck during the WTA finals in Fort Worth, Texas in November 2022, she did not simply pretend it was nothing. That small decision may have saved her life. There was no dramatic fall, no emergency scene, no crowded stadium suddenly going quiet. Just a lump that did not feel right, and a woman old enough, experienced enough, and honest enough with herself to say, "I need to get this checked." The first diagnosis was throat cancer, stage 1. The word early helped, but it did not erase the fear. Cancer does not become gentle just because doctors catch it soon. It still changes the air in the room. It still makes every ordinary plan feel less certain. It still makes a person think about time in a way they may have been avoiding. According to reports at the time, Martina's throat cancer was found after a biopsy of that enlarged lymph node, and doctors said the prognosis was good. Then came the second blow. During the tests connected to her throat, doctors discovered something suspicious in her breast. That also turned out to be cancer, unrelated to the throat cancer. It was early-stage breast cancer, but for Martina, this was not her first time hearing those words. She had already been treated for breast cancer back in 2010. This time, she was facing two cancers at once. Martina described it in her own blunt way. "This double whammy is serious but still fixable," she said, adding that she hoped for a favorable outcome and would fight with all she had. That sentence sounds strong, but listen to what is underneath it. A woman can say she is ready to fight and still be terrified. A champion can sound brave in public and still sit alone later, wondering how hard the next weeks will be. Martina had won matches where the whole world was watching, but treatment is not a match. There is no crowd lifting you, no scoreboard telling you exactly where you stand, no clean ending after the final point. There are appointments, needles, scans, side effects, nights when the body does not feel like yours. She later spoke openly about how difficult it became. During treatment, her sense of taste disappeared, she lost weight, and she missed the Australian Open, where she normally worked as a television analyst. When she returned to TV work in March 2023, she said it was great to be back. But the road there had not been easy. In another interview, she admitted something that cut through the image of the fearless athlete. She said that at one point, she feared she might not see the next Christmas. That is the kind of sentence that stops people, especially viewers who have sat in waiting rooms themselves or watched someone they love go through treatment. Because illness does something fame cannot prevent. It makes a person count. Count weeks. Count treatments. Count pounds lost. Count the days between one test and the next. For Martina, the treatment reportedly included radiation and chemotherapy, and she later called the experience one of the hardest things she had ever done. That means something coming from a woman who had once survived the emotional pressure of defection, the public pressure of fame, and the physical pressure of professional tennis. By March 2023, there was relief. Martina said she was cancer-free, telling Piers Morgan in an interview that, as far as doctors knew, she was clear. The words were simple, but the meaning was enormous. After months of fear, treatment, and exhaustion, she could breathe again. Still, surviving cancer does not mean a person returns to exactly who they were before. The body remembers. The mind remembers. Even after good news, there can be a pause before joy feels safe. People congratulate you, and you are grateful. But some part of you is still standing in that doctor's office, hearing the first diagnosis. Some part of you still knows how quickly a normal day can turn into a life before and a life after. That is why Martina's story at 69 is not simply sad, it is sobering. She was never just fighting cancer. She was facing the truth every aging champion eventually faces. The body that once made her feel nearly invincible had become the same body asking for mercy, attention, patience, and care. And Martina listened. That may be the most important part of this chapter. Not the titles, not the records, not even the comeback. She noticed something wrong. She did not ignore it. And because she acted, she gave herself a chance to keep living the life she had fought so hard to build. After Martina Navratilova was told she was cancer-free, the world wanted the simple ending. The champion won again. The fighter survived. The legend came back. And in one sense, all of that was true. By March 2023, Martina said doctors had told her that as far as they knew, she was cancer-free after her throat and breast cancer diagnoses. She returned to television work, and many people were relieved to see her back where they expected her to be, talking about tennis with the sharp eye of someone who had lived every inch of the sport. But surviving does not make a person untouched. That is the part Martina seems to understand more deeply now. Cancer did not erase her records. It did not take away Wimbledon. It did not change the fact that she had won 59 Grand Slam titles across singles, doubles, and mixed doubles, but it did change the way people looked at her, because for once the strongest woman in the room allowed the world to see something softer: fear, exhaustion, gratitude, relief, and she did not hide the lesson. In recent interviews connected to her public health work and the release of Chris and Martina, the final set, Martina has urged people to pay attention to their bodies and not ignore signs that something might be wrong. That message does not sound dramatic. It sounds practical, but coming from her, it carries weight. She noticed the enlarged lymph node in her neck while attending the WTA finals in Fort Worth, had it checked, and that decision led doctors to find early-stage throat cancer and then a separate early-stage breast cancer. That is why this chapter of her life matters to people who may not even watch tennis anymore. Because everyone over a certain age knows this feeling. A pain that lingers, a lump that should not be there, a test you keep postponing, a doctor's appointment you do not want to make because a part of you believes that if you do not hear the answer, maybe the answer cannot hurt you. Martina's message is the opposite. Do not let it slide. Not because every symptom is the worst-case scenario. Most are not. But because waiting can steal options. And if there is one thing Martina understood from tennis, it was the value of moving early. You do not wait until the ball is already past you. You read the moment. You react while there is still time. That is not just a sports lesson, that is a life lesson. Her story also became even more emotional because she was not facing this season of life alone. Chris Evert, the woman who had once been her fiercest rival, had her own cancer journey. Chris was first diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2021, had a recurrence in 2023, was later declared cancer-free, and then announced in June 2026 that the disease had returned again. She stepped away from Wimbledon coverage to focus on treatment. For longtime tennis fans, that news hit hard. These were not just two athletes from old highlight reels. These were two women many viewers had watched across decades, from white dresses on grass courts to grey hair, television studios, hospital rooms, and honest conversations about mortality. They had once fought for trophies. Now they were helping each other through something no trophy could fix. The 2026 Netflix documentary Chris and Martina, the final set arrived with that emotional weight around it. Netflix presents it as a film about their decades-long dominance of women's tennis, and a friendship even cancer could not upset. Reuters described how their shared battles deepened an already extraordinary bond, turning rivalry into something closer to sisterhood. That is what gives Martina's current life such force. She is not trying to pretend the years have not passed. She is not chasing the young version of herself. She is not asking the public to remember only the victories. Instead, she stands in the present as someone who has learned how quickly control can disappear. For most of her life, Martina controlled the court. She controlled the pace. She controlled the angle, the serve, the attack, the pressure. But illness reminded her, and everyone watching her, that the body is not an opponent you defeat once and forget. It is something you listen to, something you care for, something you stop taking for granted. At 69, Martina Navratilova is still direct, still opinionated, still unmistakably herself. But there is a different kind of strength in her now, not the strength of charging the net, the strength of telling the truth, the strength of saying she was scared, the strength of telling other people to make the appointment, ask the question, get the scan, and not wait until courage feels easy. Because courage rarely feels easy. Sometimes it is just noticing something is wrong, picking up the phone, and giving yourself a chance.